In the heart of ancient Egypt, beyond the imposing monuments and deified pharaohs, lies a lesser explored and considerably darker reality. Within the bowels of the families that built this great civilization, disturbing practices such as marriages between siblings were aimed at preserving the royal blood, yet they also sowed the seeds of deep ethical conflicts and dilemmas. This video will dive into the hidden layers of Egyptian society and family life, unveiling secrets that have been meticulously concealed for millennia. Prepare to uncover, throughout this episode, the most intriguing and dark aspects that shaped life behind the majestic obelisks. Ancient Egypt is known for its mysteries involving gods, power, and death. Within the walls of the majestic pyramids and decorated temples, stories of palace intrigues and enigmatic deaths are hidden. One of the central figures in these narratives is Pharaoh Tutankhamun, whose premature death and the subsequent discovery of his tomb in 1922 gave rise to one of the most famous curses associated with ancient Egypt. According to reports, the curse affected those who disturbed the young pharaoh's eternal rest, resulting in a series of premature deaths and misfortunes, fueling speculation and fascination with the supernatural. In addition to Tutankhamun, other royal figures were also involved in deadly plots. Power in ancient Egypt was seen as a gift from the gods, and ascension to the throne was often marked by bloody disputes. Murders within the royal family were not uncommon, with siblings, wives, and advisors often meeting their ends in obscure and sometimes violent ways. Such events were often covered up or rewritten in official chronicles to preserve the divine image of the pharaoh, while whispers of the true circumstances circulated only in murmurs among the subjects and in hidden inscriptions. The story of Ramses III, for example, vividly illustrates the violent internal struggles for power. Documents like the Judicial Papyrus of Turin describe a conspiracy to assassinate him, orchestrated by members of his own court, including one of his wives and several officials. The plot, known as the Harem Conspiracy, highlights not just the vulnerability of pharaohs, but also the complexity of palace relations and the constant threat of betrayal. Another intriguing aspect of mysterious deaths in ancient Egypt is the frequency with which they occurred under circumstances that defied logical or scientific explanations, fueling legends of curses and supernatural powers. Many of these stories have survived through hieroglyphs and ancient documents which, when studied by Egyptologists, reveal a pattern of deaths and disasters associated with certain places or artifacts. This not only enriches the historical narrative but also raises questions about the knowledge and beliefs of the time. Exploring the dark side of family and society in ancient Egypt, we encounter a rich tapestry of stories about power, curses, and murders. These narratives, although often shrouded in mystery and speculation, offer a fascinating glimpse into the political and social complexities of one of history's most intriguing civilizations. By unraveling these mysteries, we not only gain a better understanding of the past, but also appreciate the depth and persistence of human interest in the unknown and supernatural. The topic of incestuous marriages in ancient Egypt offers an intriguing window into the social and political complexities of this civilization. In contrast to the predominantly negative contemporary perception of incest, the ancient Egyptians practiced marriages between family members, especially within the royal lineage, as a deeply rooted cultural norm. These unions, often between siblings or even between parents and daughters, were driven by motivations deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs and power structure. The practice of incestuous marriages in ancient Egypt was largely confined to the royal family, and aimed to preserve the purity of the divine blood believed to run through the pharaoh's veins. The ancient Egyptians considered their kings and queens as direct incarnations of the gods on earth. Thus, maintaining a pure lineage was essential for the continuity of their divine intervention and legitimate governance. This concept was so ingrained that royal incest was seen not only as acceptable but, in many cases, as a religious and dynastic duty. The social consequences of these practices, however, were complex. While the royal family could engage in marriage among close relatives without social censure for the general population, such practices were not common or widely accepted. This created a clear distinction between the nobility and the common people, reinforcing the almost celestial nature of the royalty in contrast to the masses. The exclusivity of these practices within the royalty also helped to solidify control over political power, keeping wealth and influence firmly within the royal family. From a genetic perspective, incestuous marriages often led to health complications and deformities, as evidenced by the study of royal mummies. Modern science has confirmed that such unions can increase the likelihood of recessive genetic disorders manifesting, a fact that was unknown to the ancient Egyptians. These health complications not only affected individuals but could also impact the stability of the government, especially if the reigning pharaoh was physically weak or mentally incapacitated. It is crucial to understand that these practices should not be seen merely as a dark side of Egyptian society, but as an integrated and fundamental element of their cultural and religious identity. The practice of incestuous marriage illustrates how different social values and norms can be over time and space, reflecting the complexity and diversity of human solutions to issues of power, purity, and perpetuation. Slavery and exploitation were fundamental components of the social and economic structure of ancient Egypt, permeating all aspects of daily life. Most slaves were made up of war prisoners or individuals sold into bondage due to debts, while others were born into servitude. These slaves were employed in a variety of roles, from heavy labor in the grand constructions of pyramids and temples to domestic servants in the homes of the more fortunate. The system proved relentless, as many of these individuals faced extremely harsh living conditions, exhaustive work schedules, and inadequate nutrition, reflecting the devaluation of their lives and the rigidity of social hierarchies. The cruelty of the slavery system was evident in the way slaves were treated. Not only were they forced to work in unhealthy conditions, but they also suffered from physical violence and psychological oppression. Many of the great architectural projects that today symbolize the power and glory of Egypt were built on the suffering of these people. Slaves involved in the construction of monuments, for example, worked until exhaustion, often to death, without hope for redemption or an improved life. However, despite the oppression, there were forms of resistance and even rebellion among the slaves. Some of these acts of resistance were subtle, such as sabotage and slow work, while others were openly defiant, culminating in uprisings and escapes. These events, although often suppressed and poorly documented by historians of the period, are testimonies to the unceasing struggle for dignity and freedom. These actions not only challenged the established order but also posed a moral and social question about the sustainability of the institution of slavery itself. Rebellions, although rare and often brutally suppressed, were moments when slaves managed, even if briefly, to challenge their oppressors and draw attention to the severity of their conditions. A notable example includes the slave rebellion during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III, where the union of forced laborers managed, in an extraordinary way, a collective expression of discontent against the tyrannical regime. This dark side of society and family in ancient Egypt, reflected in exploitation and slavery, reveals the complexity of a civilization often idealized for its artistic and scientific contributions. Understanding the reality of these oppressed individuals is crucial for a full appreciation of Egyptian history, recognizing both its monumental achievements and the profound injustices that sustain this ancient society. Disputes over inheritance and succession to the throne often plunged the kingdom into periods of instability and conflict. These battles were not just disputes over wealth, but also over power and control over the fate of the empire. One of the most emblematic examples of such conflicts was the rise of Hatshepsut. Originally a regent on behalf of her stepson, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut later proclaimed herself pharaoh, a decision that challenged traditional norms of succession and gender. Her coronation not only set a precedent but also sowed the seeds of internal disputes, as Thutmose III grew and became more aware of his own claim to the throne. Sibling rivalries were another common source of dynastic disputes in ancient Egypt. One example of this were the conflicts between Ramses III and his sons. The fear of losing power and influence was so pervasive that it led to assassination attempts and conspiracies within the palace, as evidenced by the famous harem conspiracy, where members of the pharaoh's own harem plotted his death. These internal struggles not only threatened the stability of a pharaoh's reign but also reflected broader tensions within the royal family and the court. Furthermore, inheritance disputes also led to changes in religion and cultural practices. Pharaoh Akhenaten, for example, introduced monotheism in an effort to consolidate his power and reduce the influence of the priests of Amun. After his death, this religious shift became a point of contention among his successors, culminating in the return to polytheism under the reign of Tutankhamun. This return was not just a rejection of Akhenaten's religious policies but also a way to legitimize the new administration and reaffirm ancestral traditions. Women, although often viewed through the lens of their relationships with men in power, also played significant roles in dynastic disputes, both as facilitators and protagonists. Queen Tai, for example, was an influential advisor and diplomat during the reign of her husband, Amenhotep III, and her son, Akhenaten. Her ability to maneuver among different factions within the royal court helped shape the kingdom's policies during a critical period. These dynastic disputes not only shaped the internal politics of ancient Egypt but also affected its external relations. Periods of instability often coincided with the weakening of Egyptian control over foreign territories and a decline in external political influence. Thus, the battles for the throne were more than mere familial rivalries. They were catalysts for significant changes both within the kingdom and in its position relative to other powers in the region. The society was marked by extremely pronounced social inequality reflected in all aspects of daily life. At the top of the social pyramid, the pharaoh, considered a god on earth, and his court of nobles and priests lived in almost inconceivable luxury. Palaces were opulent constructions filled with gold ornaments and precious stones, large halls, and lush gardens that served as an oasis of wealth and power. This elite enjoyed a variety of foods, fine clothing, and a life of ceremonies and festivities that highlighted their divine status and separation from the common people. In contrast, the lower classes, including peasants, craftsmen, and laborers, lived in precarious conditions. The majority of the population resided in modest dwellings, often no more than mud huts with straw roofs, located in miserable ghettos or rural villages near the banks of the Nile. Their diets were primarily based on coarse grain breads and beer, with little variety or adequate nutrition. Hard work, under often harsh conditions, was a constant, with few chances for social mobility or life improvement. This great disparity not only highlighted the physical and social distance between the classes but also fueled underlying discontent among the masses. While not common, there were periods when popular revolts erupted, often triggered by factors such as famine, high taxes, or abuses by the ruling elite. These movements, although usually suppressed, indicated the social tensions that simmered beneath the surface of the established order. The social division was further exacerbated by religious and cultural beliefs that legitimized the established hierarchy. The dominant ideology promoted the notion that the pharaoh and nobility possessed an almost divine status, justifying their control and exploitation of the working classes. This view was perpetuated through monuments, temples, and sacred texts, which not only celebrated the divinity of the pharaoh but also reinforced the social structure. Despite this rigid stratification, Egyptian society demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt and maintain continuity, sustaining its stability for millennia. However, the occasional fissures in the form of revolts and conflicts reveal that extreme inequality had its consequences, both for the governed and for the rulers. The history of ancient Egypt, therefore, offers a powerful example of how deep social division can influence both the culture and politics of a civilization. The legal system was deeply intertwined with religious concepts, and it was believed that maintaining the law was a way to sustain the cosmic order, or Ma'at. Crimes ranged from minor offenses, such as theft, to serious offenses like murder and treason against the pharaoh, who was seen not only as a ruler but also as a living deity. Religious crimes, such as disrespecting the gods or desecrating temples, were considered particularly severe, as they could attract divine wrath, threatening the stability and prosperity of the kingdom. The system of punishments in ancient Egypt reflected the severity with which society viewed the breach of laws. Penalties were often brutal and intended to serve as an example to deter future offenders. Thieves could have their hands cut off, while more serious crimes, such as homicide or treason, generally resulted in public execution, often by decapitation or burning. The death penalty could also be applied in cases of forging documents or conspiring against the pharaoh. The judicial system also included various forms of non-lethal punishments, which could vary depending on the social status of the accused and the nature of the crime. Less severe penalties included flogging, which was common for minor offenses, and fines or reparations that the guilty party had to pay to the victim or the state. In some cases, especially for those of higher class, the punishment could be substituted or accompanied by the confiscation of property. To ensure that laws were respected, Egypt relied on an organized system of officials and magistrates who handled the enforcement of justice. These officers not only investigated crimes but also presided over courts where cases were heard. Courts were generally composed of a group of high officials and priests who decided the fate of the accused. Legal proceedings emphasized obtaining a confession, and coercion methods, including torture, were often employed during interrogations. Exploring the dimensions of crime and punishment in ancient Egypt reveals not just the legal practices of the time, but also the importance that Egyptian culture placed on order, justice, and moral righteousness. These practices were fundamental to the maintenance of social and cosmic harmony, seen as essential for the prosperity of the kingdom. Thus, the Egyptian legal system, with its relentless justice and sometimes brutal punishments, reflects a society that deeply valued law and order, seeing them as intertwined with the very fabric of the universe. Corruption and the abuse of power were maladies that plagued the governance and religious structures, creating significant social imbalances and injustices. The influence of officials and priests extended beyond their administrative and ceremonial functions, reaching spheres where power was exercised for personal gain and exploitation of the population. These corrupt practices permeated various levels of administration, from those in charge of construction projects to those responsible for tax collection and resource distribution. One of the most emblematic cases of corruption involved the priests, who held a significant role not just as spiritual mediators but also as managers of vast amounts of land and resources. Priests frequently took advantage of their position to divert resources intended for temples for personal use. This included the misappropriation of offerings and the manipulation of lands belonging to the gods, illegally selling them and retaining the profits for themselves. Officials, in turn, manipulated the distribution of food and other essential goods, creating artificial shortages to drive up prices and benefit from the profits. Those in positions of power could also facilitate or obstruct judicial processes, accepting bribes to influence legal decisions. This type of corruption not only harmed ordinary citizens but also eroded trust in the state and religious institutions, which were fundamental to the social and political stability of ancient Egypt. The impacts of corruption were profound, exacerbating social and economic inequalities. The exploitation of the working population through exorbitant fees and taxes contributed to the deterioration of living conditions, while the most powerful grew richer. Moreover, the diversion of resources intended for infrastructure and public welfare projects resulted in a lack of support for the most needy populations and a gradual deterioration of the quality of public services and major constructions, which were essential to Egyptian society. Cases of corruption and abuse of power in ancient Egypt not only reveal the challenges faced by one of the most fascinating civilizations in history but also serve as a reminder of the dangers that such practices pose to the integrity and health of any society. Studying these issues in the context of ancient Egypt offers valuable lessons on the importance of vigilance and integrity in positions of power, a timeless and universal theme. As we look through the pages of history, we are often captivated by the aura of grandeur of ancient civilizations. Majestic pyramids, golden treasures, and deified kings paint a picture of prosperity and unquestionable order. However, when we remove the veil of idealization, darker and more complex accounts emerge that challenge this romantic view. Evidence suggests that behind the imposing monuments, there were societies marked by intense inequalities, conflicts, and adversities that affected the daily lives of their citizens. This contrasting reality is evident, for example, in the rigid social hierarchies that defined every aspect of life from birth. The majority of the population, composed of workers and servants, faced extremely harsh living conditions. These individuals toiled under the scorching sun, building the structures we admire today, often without receiving proper recognition or compensation. Such disparities were justified and perpetuated through a religious and political structure that favored the elite, while the majority remained marginalized. In addition to economic inequalities, these civilizations also faced significant social problems. Domestic violence, abuse of power by leaders, and even child exploitation were present aspects, often institutionalized. Documents and artifacts from the period indicate that although there were laws to protect citizens, The enforcement of these laws often favored the richer and more powerful, leaving the lower classes without adequate legal protection. Another aspect often obscured by the idealized view is the use of religion as a tool of control. The deification of rulers not only reinforced the hierarchical structure but also manipulated religious beliefs to justify inequality and human sacrifice. Rituals and offerings, which supposedly would ensure cosmic order and prosperity, also served to reaffirm the power and authority of the leaders, often at the expense of the general well-being. Confronting these darker and contradictory aspects helps us better understand the complexity of ancient societies. As much as we admire their achievements, it is crucial to recognize the multiple facets of daily life that formed the fabric of their cultures. This more balanced view allows not only a deeper understanding of the past but also a reflection on the injustices that continue to persist in our modern societies.